Good afternoon, Patriots. This is the American Vision, broadcast on the TLBTV network and brought to you by the Liberty Beacon Project. Today, I'm very excited to have two guests on who have an interesting story to tell us. And that's Mrs. Anna Lorance, who is the mother of First Lieutenant Clint Lorance. And also I have John Maher on from Chicago, and John is an attorney for First Lieutenant Clint Lorance. And Anna is coming to us from Texas. So Anna, tell us where you're from in Texas, and tell us a little bit about your son Clint, and then John, if you need to jump in, just come on in anytime, because we're just going to have a conversation.
Sir.
First, I want to tell you thank you for having us on your show. And I would like to tell you a little bit about Clint. Clint is in Leavenworth Prison. He joined the military when he was 18 years old after watching 9/11. And he came in and told me, Mom, I've got to join the military because I've got to do something to help my country. And I was a little hesitant to sign for him because he was 17 at that time. And I told him, you turn 18 in a few months, so just wait till then, because that way if he was shipped off to war and something happened, I didn't have to, have the regret that I had signed him up when he was 17. But anyway, he signed up at 18, and he served 10 years in the Army, and he loved his career. He loved it. And he would tell you that that was his first love over his family. And he was just very much into his service. And then when he went to Afghanistan in 2012, he was called in to replace a lieutenant that had shrapnel wounds, and to a group of soldiers to lead the platoon that he didn't know and they didn't know him. But he was called in to go to out and lead this platoon. He was then charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 attempted murder. And he never fired his weapon because on the second day that they were there, they were fixing to be ambushed. And I'm going to let John tell you that story, but this is horrible. We do not treat our soldiers this way. If they chose Clint to go lead that platoon that day, you don't second guess his actions, because he was trained to do that job, and he needed to be able to do the job that he was trained to do. And so that day, he was, the prosecutors said that he had killed innocent civilians, and they were not innocent civilians. So today, my son is sitting in Leavenworth Prison. He's on his 6th year into a 19-year sentence. And he should have been given medals instead of a prison sentence.
This is just appalling to me to hear this story, because as an old Marine and an officer in the Marine Corps, we took care of our Marines, and everybody backed everybody up. And I can't believe that what's happened. It seems like politics have overcome our military, and it's become a social experiment. So, John, what do you have to add?
Well, Bill, again, thank you so much for having Anna and me on the show this afternoon. We're very happy to be here. And just briefly, by way of background, I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve and a former active duty prosecutor at the 1st Infantry Division, and a couple of tours in Afghanistan myself. With regard to your question as to what happened in the platoon, yes, when I first came on the case and my team was after the court-martial. And given my experience in Afghanistan, when you have a claim that there's civilian casualties, I initially scratched my head, because one of the things we do over there is try to identify all of the population using biometric enrollment. And that consists of an iris scan, fingerprints, a DNA swab, a digital image, and a note card where you fill out family information and then upload that into a system. The most junior soldier on the ground does that. That authoritative database then is used when we come across roadside bombs, either to defuse the bomb or after the bomb has gone off. We collect the forensic tidbits and test them for fingerprints and DNA, and run it through that system I just mentioned. And if there's a hit, you have identified who made the bomb. And so therefore, you are able to go out and either capture, kill, or bring those people in and squeeze intelligence out of them in order to go out and break their larger terror cells. To your point about how the platoon would ordinarily stick together, one of the things that struck me was, why are these paratroopers testifying against their lieutenant? And I was scratching my head. Well, a regrettable tragedy in this case was defense counsel at trial decided not to inform the members of the 82nd Airborne, who were the jury, that each one of those 9 paratroopers was initially accused of murder themselves, was then given a grant of immunity for murder, and then ordered by the commanding general, John Nicholson, to cooperate in the trial against Clint Lorance. So on the one hand, you can see how the command divided the platoon so they can be against Lieutenant Lorance. Then we have the terrible mistake, and I do believe it is a terrible mistake, because every jury member was probably scratching their head saying, why are these paratroopers testifying against their lieutenant when they were out there in gunfights together? Like you mentioned, that bond should be tighter than true brotherhood from blood. And what explains it is they didn't necessarily testify voluntarily. They were accused of murder. They got immunity, and then they were ordered to cooperate. And nobody knew that until we presented that as part of our appeal and actually pulled the actual orders to cooperate and the immunity grants from the record of trial and posted it on social media.
That seems to be a trick that prosecutors often use, where they can give one immunity or take a plea bargain to testify against the other party. And it sounds like they've done this. And I've heard about this General John Nicholson, and I've never heard anything good about him. And I don't understand what his agenda is.
Well, I think I can comment.
By the way, John, tell us a little bit about your what you're doing, so everybody understands that why you're defending Clint and what you do for our soldiers and our armed service personnel.
Sure. I'm defending Clint Lorance because it's the first time in the 23 years I've practiced law, both as an active duty military officer, a reservist, a Justice Department lawyer, as well as in private practice, where I have a client who's not guilty, which means the government didn't prove the case. He's innocent. What he did on the field that day, he gave an order when three individual Afghans were riding on a single motorcycle at an excessive rate of speed at his platoon's exposed route of march behind a minesweeper in a minefield. A paratrooper was on top of a grape berm and called out the threat, later testified at trial that he perceived the threat and fired his rifle pursuant to the rules of engagement to defend himself and to defend a platoon, but regrettably he missed. Lorance was standing below that grape berm as they were moving in single file route of march and got on his radio, as a good lieutenant should be, and radioed a gun truck which Clint Lorance had positioned in an overwatch to protect against this precise anticipated type of threat, where the M240 Bravo gunner took out 2 of the riders and a third escaped. The 2 riders that were killed formed the basis for the murder charges, and the rider that escaped forms the basis of the attempted murder charge. So the problem with the case from a constitutional law standpoint was the fact that when the patrol continued through the town, they got into another gunfight, killed 2 other Afghans, and then wounded a third, shot Muhammad Rahim in the arm, and captured him, sent him to the hospital, and he was recovered with HME on his hands. Now, to wrap all of this up, as the platoon walked back by the deceased riders, someone said, "Oh my God, that's the village elder." At which point the case became a civilian casualty case rather than a combat case. The problem, though, was at trial, the prosecution urged the jury that Lorance's order, based on the paratroopers' threat assessment, was unlawful because the riders were civilians, when at all times on U.S. government databases, a Google search away were biometric records that the riders had left their fingerprints and DNA on roadside bombs at grid coordinates where U.S. personnel had been previously killed or wounded. That makes them terrorists, and that should have been turned over to the defense so the defense could use that to forcefully defend Clint at trial.
So what you're saying is that the village elder was probably the chief Taliban terrorist.
There's the thing, Bill. You can be both, and many times you are. That motorcycle that was approaching the platoon, it didn't need to ride behind a minesweeper, because each night the Taliban and the terrorist bomb makers come out and replant the bombs. Our personnel, by contrast, have to use a minesweeper each time they go out because the bombs have been placed. And as a former infantryman yourself or former Marine officer yourself, you have no room to maneuver when you're through a minefield. You got to stop, freeze, and that's it. Mm-hmm. So that gunfight there was one problem in terms of not turning over the evidence that left fingerprints and DNA on bombs. The other part that is a failing of the prosecution in this case under the Constitution was the Army on August 2nd, 2012, 30 days after the July 2nd gunfight, prepared a significant activity report, otherwise known as a SIG Act. And in it, quote unquote, I'm trying to get it as close as possible, that Clint's platoon was being scouted for an impending attack or ambush, and at least one confirmed insurgent was KIA for killed in action. That Army report was not turned over to the defense either. And that would have helped his defense say Clint was in the middle of a gunfight. And if he didn't give that order to fire and take that motorcycle out, he could have been court-martialed for dereliction of duty. And if we juxtapose or compare this case to the December 2015 Bagram Airman case, where 6 New York Air National Guardsmen were conducting a dismounted foot patrol near Bagram Air Base, they let a motorcycle ride right up to them. Nobody fired their rifle or pistol. He detonated himself and killed all 6. That's what we're facing there. And so there's a good measure of Monday morning quarterbacking our lieutenants who are in the actual fight. And secondly, a problem we've learned in the Lorance case is Army officials and Army prosecutors are looking at this case as if Clint Lorance were a police officer on Main Street, USA, rather than a lieutenant in the infantry in the 82nd Airborne in a combat patrol where his platoon that he just inherited had just sustained 4 casualties. And we have evidence from Command Sergeant Major Gustafson, the battalion sergeant major, that every time they went outside the wire within 100 meters, they were taking rounds. So this was not Sunday school or Sunday in peaceful America. This was the 82nd Airborne, who we sent there to do the very thing that Clint Lorance did.
Yes, and so what's happened politically is we now look upon our personnel over there as, like you said, police, and this is considered a police action when we know darn good and well when there's fighting like this going on, this is a war, and whether they call it a war or a conflict or whatever, our military people, as far as they're concerned, and you know and I know, we're at war.
And here's the thing. Why did they refer Clint Lorance to court-martial, Bill? Well, we think it has something to do with, this was July 2nd, 2012. We think it has something to do with March of 2012 in the neighboring district of Panjwai, which is next door to where Clint was, in Zhari in Kandahar province. Those are the 2 districts, where an American soldier shot and killed 16 or 17 people in their homes at night. And those were ostensibly civilian casualties. And the chain of command over that soldier suffered consequences to their career. By contrast, Clint Lorance, when the civilian casualty balloon went up, the chain of command tried to distance itself from Clint Lorance and make him out to be off the reservation. Whereas 48 hours previously, he was such a rock star that of all the lieutenants the brigade commander could have picked to replace the wounded in action previous platoon leader, they picked Lorance. He went down, did his job, had the courage to meet the enemy and protect his platoon, but instead they distanced themselves, not the captain, not the major, not the lieutenant colonel, not the colonel, and not the general. None of them had a consequence. Only this brand new young lieutenant who, although had served 10 years in the Army as an enlisted man and a non-commissioned officer, had such promising potential, they sent him to Green to Gold program, sent him to college to make him an officer. In all of his fitness reports, both as a non-commissioned officer and an officer, sincerely, without any hyperbole at all or exaggeration, were glowing. And the type of guy that Anna Lorance and his father, Tracy Lorance, raised, he looked me in the eye when I met him in prison out in Leavenworth, and he said, "John, if I didn't give that order and my men were wounded or killed, I'd be in another prison for the rest of my life."
Yes.
And Anna, tell us about Clint now. Tell us where he's at and what his day is like and what he's doing. And he's been there for what, 6 years?
Yes, August the 2nd, it'll be 6 years. I would like to add something to what John said. You know, my son is sitting in prison, and he may possibly be the only guy that's sitting in prison and being called a murderer that never fired his weapon. He never fired his weapon. He didn't kill nobody. He didn't touch nobody. He gave the order to, after he felt the hostile intent, and after he was asked, he gave permission to fire. And, you know, that one thing just sticks with me constantly. And because they're calling my son a murderer when he put those boots on every single day for 10 days to offer his life if need be. And, you know, for his country. And to me, it's totally unacceptable. You know, it just doesn't make no sense to me. We cannot treat our military this way.
Yes, I understand. He's doing his duty and protecting his men, and that's what happens. So, what's his day like there, and what's he doing? Just kind of in general, anyway.
Clint is a very busy character. He doesn't like wasting his time, so he's really into a lot of helping the different guys that are in there that may not have family to help them. He'll help them write their different parole packages and different things. He really loves to study law and study. Well, he doesn't just read any kind of book. He reads, if it's not educational, he doesn't spend his time on it. And so I've had people from Leavenworth tell me that your son is just as great of a leader inside here as he is out. And that didn't surprise me because that's who he is. That's just who he is. And, but he's very positive. You know, at the court-martial, he turned around and looked at me as soon as they sentenced him. And he turned around and said, "Mom, I can't leave here unless I know that you're going to be okay. Just count this as another mission. I can go to prison if that's what they want to do, but I could never come home and look those mothers in the eyes and tell them, because my poor leadership, you no longer have your son." And so, but before he left that night, he said, "Mom, you have to make me a promise. Promise me you'll stay positive." And, you know, that's been one of the hardest things that I've went through because of all that we have found out that they wrongfully done against him to prosecute him, you know. But through it all, in my weak times, Clint is the one that lifts me back up just by hearing it in my voice. He is a very strong young man. And so he keeps focused on helping others, benefiting himself. He works out all the time. He's doing college. And he's talking to and has got a lot of the guys that are in there with him going back to college so that they are prepared when they get out. And so he's
a wonderful thing. Yeah. So obviously he's a great leader. Just by you describing what he's doing in prison, helping the others, he's still doing exactly what he did out on the battlefield, which is just is another good point in his favor. So, John, what is in the future for Clinton? What's the next steps? Because I know you're working hard to help Anna and Clint.
Well, for Bill, next steps are several. We have a federal lawsuit pending right now in civilian court in the U.S. District Court for the District of Kansas in Topeka, and we had to file it there. Clint's military appeals are all done, and I'd like to comment on the military appeals, if I may. We filed this new evidence with the Army's appellate court on Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and they denied all relief. They wouldn't even let us come in and present oral argument. They didn't give us an explanation and not. And one thing we haven't discussed is we've highlighted some of the prosecution's failures and to disclose this evidence so Clint could have a fair trial of all the facts. But it's also worth noting that his defense counsel, that the Lorance family retained, a private attorney who's a former active duty Marine judge advocate from Texas, he arrived the night before this fully contested double murder and attempted murder general court martial, where Clint faced a potential life imprisonment sentence from out of town from another trial. He did not meet with Clint that night. The second time this attorney met with Clint Lorance was the morning of this trial, and he had not interviewed any of the American witnesses, and he had not interviewed any of the Afghan witnesses, to include the attempted murder victim, Haji Karamullah, who escaped from the motorcycle. The Army CID and prosecution has interviewed all of them. However, Mr. Womack, Guy Womack, did not interview any of these people, and he went so far to defend himself to write in an affidavit to the Army court that his decision not to interview witnesses is, quote, a superior tactical decision, end quote. And the Army court, incredibly, said, yeah, that's fine, that's reasonable. So we raised two constitutional problems. Number one, the Fifth Amendment, that the prosecution didn't disclose the DNA, fingerprint, and significant activity report. Number two, we raised the Sixth Amendment, ineffective assistance of counsel, because how can you do your job to defend this lieutenant when you haven't interviewed the most critical witnesses? The Army court denied it and said we were wrong. We respectfully disagree. We have filed habeas corpus in the district court in Kansas. The case is pending. We've alleged those grounds, and we've also added a prosecutorial misconduct ground, and here's why. And I hope I'm not monopolizing the conversation, but I think this is an important point.
Fascinating, John.
And please note
my basic knowledge of UCMJ, I mean, even I can see where all this is heading.
Well, here's the heartbreaker. I spent 23 years associated with the Army JAG Corps, and I'm still in the individual ready reserve right now. I don't do too much for the Army because I do this kind of work, which is ordinarily opposed. But in March of 2018, the Chief Judge of the Army Court, Joseph Berger, Brigadier General, handpicked for that position by the Judge Advocate General of the Army, Charles Peedy, Lieutenant General Charles Peedy, went on a presentation in a panel at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C., a think tank, about the My Lai massacre and Lieutenant Calley, who actually fired his rifle and personally is alleged to have killed 22 women and civilian and elderly people, non-combatants, and authorized his platoon to kill over 100. Mm-hmm. General Berger, and you can visit the website and see his presentation, met and appeared in his full uniform, in his capacity as the Chief Judge of the Army Court of Criminal Appeals, when Lorance's case was still pending within the Army at the Secretary of the Army's level, and he said the following misrepresentation. He said Lorance was convicted of changing the rules of engagement to fire on any motorcycle on site. The problem with that, Bill, the jury found him not guilty of that. So you've got the Chief Judge now adopting an advocate's position rather than a neutral, objective judicial position, defending the result of the Army rather than the integrity of the process, and he's spoiling the well because the Secretary of the Army could have thrown Clint's case out based on the evidence we've presented, and our papers were still there. So what we did was we wrote a very professional, tactful, and we believe courteous letter to General Berger, asking him to correct the record, to say, you can't do that, sir. The jury found them not guilty. You just told the entire viewing public that the jury found him guilty of it, that he took it upon himself to fight the war the way he wanted to. And that's completely wrong and patently false. So he refused to correct it. We asked for a meeting, and he stonewalled us and slow-walked us, and finally it became clear that we couldn't meet with him. Then in July, the following July, a couple of months later, we learned that the Judge Advocate General of the Army himself, Lieutenant General Charles Petey, the senior most uniform officer in the Army for the purposes of the law, spoke to a member of Congress on the telephone and said the very same mistruth, that Lorance changed the rules of engagement on his own to fire on any motorcycle, the idea to portray Lorance as killing indiscriminately, when admittedly firing on any motorcycle would have been a violation of the rules of engagement. But that didn't happen. The jury said he's not guilty. So you have the senior most uniformed legal officer who handpicks the judges on the Army Army court, who handpicked the senior judge, the chief judge, Joseph Berger, saying the same thing to the American public and to at least one member of the United States Congress. And to what extent? Because they are defending the Army's decision rather than defending the integrity of a reliable, trustworthy process. And that we believe to be an abandonment of their office and a dereliction of their own duty, coupled with prosecutorial misconduct.
So your next step then is you filed the case in Topeka in the civil court?
Yes, sir. It's before a federal district judge, and there's two things going on simultaneously. Number one, we're waiting right now for the United States to respond, which is part of the protocol or the procedure. Number two, we're continuing our efforts to try to encourage the President of the United States to disapprove the findings in the sentence. And we're working hard, mainly through an organization called United American Patriots, headquartered in Alexandria, Virginia, that defends service members accused of crime in combat. And they've been helpful to the Lorance family and to the defense team fighting for Clint. I'm just one of a team. There's a number of attorneys who've been helping and supporters. So we've learned also a very disturbing process is in place. Bill, a convicted drug dealer, a federally convicted drug dealer, can file a petition with the Office of the Pardon Attorney in Washington, D.C. to ask for his sentence to be reduced, to be commuted, to get clemency, to get parole, or to get a pardon to the president. However, if a soldier like Clint Lorance or a soldier like First Sergeant John Hatley prepares a petition, sends it to the Office of the Pardon Attorney, they refuse to forward it to the President of the United States. Instead, in a disturbingly circular fashion, they send it right back to the very department that wrongfully incarcerated this young man and is wrongfully imprisoning him. So, in other words, a federally convicted drug dealer can get to the president easier than Clint Lorance.
That's just appalling to me. I can't believe that that's happening, but I believe you.
And please know, Bill, I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Similar
I'm sorry,
stories.
Bill. Well, I'm so sorry, Bill. I didn't mean to cut you off, sir. Just before I forget, everything I've shared with you, please know that we've conducted our own due diligence, that we can point to facts, that we can point to evidence, that we can point to witnesses, that we can point to data and reports. And your viewers can look at this material at freeclintlorance.com, at uap.org. All of our legal papers are filed there, and our entire lawsuit is there. Now, admittedly, because it covers 6 years, it's about 78 pages. But I assure you, many patriots and veterans, they might want to read it. And please know that I am one of several members on the team who have vetted this, cross-referenced it, and corroborated, such that we're really not making arguments anymore, we believe. We're presenting facts. And those are the places your viewers can look. They can look at uap.org, and they can look at freeclintlorance.com.
Okay. So, Anna, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I would like to say that if any of the viewers would like to write to Clint personally in support, you can go to Free Clint on Facebook, and I have his address there, or either one of the emails of the websites that John just gave you. You can find his address there as well, and he would love to hear from you.
Now, I'm not familiar with military prisons like Leavenworth, but I do know that in many penitentiaries, people, there's really some strict regulations about sending articles to the prisoners. And I guess you can send a letter, but like, could somebody send a book or something like that, or does it have to go through like Amazon or somebody like that?
Well, if Clint can receive books and magazine subscriptions, however, and that can only come through Amazon. However, at this time, he has the allotted amount that he is able to have any sell at one time, and so he's asked that we not send any books at this time. He could really use some stamped envelopes from USPS.com. He can't receive just the envelopes, but he can receive stamps or the stamped envelopes. You also can send him a money order, but he had rather that you donate to UAP.
Okay, I see. Yeah, I'm just trying to, because there's so many generous Americans, and especially vets are really generous when it comes to helping other vets and so forth. So I wanted to, kind of let people understand it a little bit. So if I took an envelope and put a forever stamp on there, and I sent that to him, then he could use that to mail you or other people letters. So that would be a help to him.
No, he can't receive stamps or envelopes unless they come directly from USPS.com.
Oh, I see.
He can't receive them directly from home. It'd be much cheaper if he could, but he can't receive those.
Okay.
It has to come straight from the vendor.
What would he like to have, besides that? Anything that we could that someone could send?
Just a letter to tell him you support him means a lot to him.
Okay, so so we'll be sure to have all that information with the article that this video is embedded in, and we'll be able. But maybe it would be good just give his address anyway of how we would write to him. It'd be Lieutenant Clint Lorance, Lorance.
Yes, it's 1300 North Warehouse Road, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas 66027.
66027. Okay. Repeat that again in case somebody was trying to write down. 1300 North Warehouse Road, did you say?
It is Clint Lorance at 1300 North Warehouse Road, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas 66027.
Okay, we got it. Okay. And John, you gave out some links. Would you like to repeat those? Just make sure everybody got them.
Yes, of course, Bill. The nonprofit organization that's been at the forefront fighting for Clint since day one is called United American Patriots, Inc. It's headquartered in Alexandria, Virginia, and people could read all about Clint personally, see pictures of him, and see all of our publicly filed legal papers at www.uap.org. And you could also see largely the same at www.freeclintlorance.com.
Okay, thank you all so much for being on the American Vision with me today. And Anna, thank you so much, and God bless you. I know that John, I'm really impressed with what you're doing. I know that you're going to do something good for Clinton. You're going to get him free, as he should be.
Well, I appreciate the vote of confidence, Bill. It's been a long, slow slog, and I sure hope that one day we can deliver a victory. I really do.
God bless you both, and God bless all of our armed forces, our service personnel.
Thank you, sir. God bless you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Anna. You look beautiful.
Well, thank
He
you.
is. Okay, folks, I'm back, and I don't know about you. I don't know what your emotions are after watching this interview, but mine are: I'm angry, I'm saddened, I'm upset, and I just can't believe that our country has come to a point where politics and corruption are more important than justice and truth in taking care of our armed forces personnel. I can't imagine anything like this ever happening when I served, although I guess it could have. I know I certainly would not condone anything like that. So I'd like you to have Clint in your prayers, and I'd like you to read about him, read everything that John told you about, and think about the what's really happening. And as they told me off air, Clint is not the only one. There are more. And this is what we're doing to our servicemen. And it's just appalling to me that the politicians can do what they do. So remember, where there is no vision, the people perish. That's Proverbs 29:18. And as I always say, where the American people have no vision, America will not have, will perish. So where the American people have no vision, America will perish. So God bless all of our armed forces personnel, and our veterans, our fallen heroes, and those who have been unjustly imprisoned in places like Fort Leavenworth. God bless you all, and God save our America. We need you now more than ever before.